Hello, everybody. My name is Blake Commerdiner. I am the XR and film programmer here at South by Southwest. I'd like to welcome you to another amazing live session here at South by Southwest Online XR. This is going to be a super, super exciting panel. I'm very excited to have our wonderful panelists up here. All right, so we are here today to talk with Fabian Soufi, who is the producer of Hybrids and Strings, and Lauren Moffatt, who is the amazing director and artist for Hybrids and Strings.
Thanks a lot, Blake. Thanks a lot. Yeah, we're very happy to be here. Thanks everyone for coming and showing up. So, as mentioned a little bit earlier, this is meant to be very interactive. I'm just gonna ask a few questions to Lauren, whom I've been working for quite some time on this project. And I think feel free to interrupt and ask questions or precisions or comments on whatever we're saying. I think the beauty of being in a virtual world is to have perhaps more freedom, not be shy. I don't know what you look like. I don't know if you're a man or a girl or whatever. So it's an opportunity to, let go and do whatever we want, including some nonsense. So, oh, Blake, you're back as your Bernie. Yeah, I like you this way. So, um, Lauren, we met about 2 years ago on a show, and about 1.5 years ago, we emitted an artist call. I run this company, cultural practice called Fabula, and in which we're trying to put the artists, contemporary artists, at the center of world making. Our idea is that the future will involve a lot of world building, world making, something we call worlding. And in order to work on this future, we bet on the artistry and the kind of people who are really in tune with their senses in order to help shape a virtual future that we want and that we're interested in. And so that's the call that we did 18 months ago, on which Lauren, you answered. So I'd like to start with that perhaps as to basically what got you into answering this call and what was your initial interest in working on this project with us.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I was really excited when I received the call out because the prompt for this particular commission residency that I was eventually selected for was Donna Haraway's book, Welding with the Trouble. So it was kind of specifically asking for projects that were trying to sort of use new forms of storytelling to kind of recontextualize disaster. I mean, this is very much paraphrasing, but the call out was very interesting, and it seemed to fit very well with this project that I already was developing at that time, which was largely about photogrammetry practice. So I do a lot of 3D scanning using photogrammetry as a technique, and then I work with the scanned assets and create custom textures for them by painting or by drawing or by using all of these different sort of physical techniques, because I'm very interested in kind of hybrid physical virtual worlds. And so it was actually pretty automatic when I wrote the proposal for the project. Everything kind of fit very well with what it seemed like Fabian was looking for. And yeah, I wrote this. I wrote more or less something very similar to what we actually have here in the show. So just, I suppose it makes sense a little bit to explain exactly, because it's possible that some of you haven't actually experienced it yet. In of Hybrids and Strings, you sort of enter a moonlit forest, like it's sort of a nighttime forest environment. And there is a kind of a really sort of strange being that you encounter there, who you almost immediately realize is kind of an avatar. It's mirroring all of your movements. So you have your own body and your own hands, but there's somebody who's kind of mirroring everything that you do. And then some these sort of strings begin to appear and begin to sort of connect different organisms and different elements that are in the landscape around you. And so it's a forest landscape, kind of like a universal forest sort of landscape. Like there are a lot of different species from ecosystems that don't seem like they really fit together. There are a lot of different animals that you often don't find in the same ecosystem. It's sort of, yeah, almost like an assemblage of a forest. And and yeah, the animals begin to be connected to the trees, and the trees begin to be connected to the flowers, and the flowers begin to be connected to your hands or to the avatar's hands. And then you notice that everything sort of begins to be delayed. So the avatar is still replicating your movements, but increasingly slower. And this is something that is a sort of another stream. Like there's this sort of world building part where I wanted to collect all of these plant assets and put them together in a place that that I was making. And then there was also a part of it that was about experimenting with body, like using the body as a site for narrative. So kind of creating this story that's about deceleration by decelerating the body of the visitor. And this is why sometimes in the texts where we talk about the work, we call it a deceleration machine, because it's kind of got this element in it where part of the story comes from the way that you eventually begin to move in this place. Um, and yeah, like this was all sort of something that all of these elements existed in what was originally written, although some things have changed around in in the time in between.
Mm-hmm,
Yeah.
mm-hmm. One thing that I remember saying in your application and proposal was that the story was immediately sensory. It was something like you become entangled, things slow down, and this is what you feel. There's no subtext, there's no voiceover per se, at least for now. And so
Not for
it's very
now.
much a sensation, right? And so I'm interested in perhaps coming back a little bit about what kind of sensation of sensory feelings you're trying to provoke with the piece.
I suppose I find experiences, and sometimes they come from glitches, but experiences in VR environments where I experience weightlessness or I experience kind of like a sort of a lag that makes me feel like my body, my physical body is also moving more slowly than it actually, objectively possibly is. Um, and so I like playing with these kind of like this kind of elevator feeling where you can kind of make people feel like they're experiencing weightlessness by moving the first person camera in a kind of up or down, um, and whereas their body is actually stationary. So
Mm-hmm.
I was really keen to experiment with these. Like the previous project that I worked on, it had some movement aspects to it as well. But I was really interested in the next project. So in our project to really um, work with VR that sort of becomes a performance that the visitor sort of performs a certain series of movements or and in this case, it's sort of to achieve a certain state of being, which is, I suppose, quite calm, maybe a little bit having a feeling of forgetting the body for a little while, feeling as if feeling connected with this environment that you're inside of. So through all of these strings, kind of feeling these sort of entanglements with all of the other elements in the environment. Um, and yeah, these kinds
Right.
of yeah.
And obviously, so in the call, there was a lot of references to stories, to new types of stories. I think somewhere in the call there was this sentence by a philosopher saying we need new kind of stories, stories about the future, which are not about technology or or apocalypse or this kind of very schematic outcomes, but something that help us face the present. And so the story, although there is no voices, I think there is a strong, or I feel there's a strong element of storytelling in your piece. Perhaps I think it's okay for people who haven't seen it yet to kind of contextualize as to who are the characters in there, who is Susan Clare, for example, or where she's coming from. All these elements of stories are interesting as well.
Okay, well, yeah. And also around the time that I began developing this work, I was really interested in science fiction, but specifically science fiction that works with apocalypse, or kind of like the day after the end of the world, these kinds of scenarios, or the day just before. I got really interested in this series of books by J.G. Ballard about different types of natural disasters, and most of which are actually kind of relatively plausible, and the types of natural threats that we have now. And these books were written in the 70s, I think. Um, so there's one about wind, there's one about fire and drought, and there's another about floods. And then there's one where the planet is becoming consumed by this kind of crystal matter, like everything is becoming mineralized. Um, and this is kind of the book that diverts a little bit from the rest of the series, in the sense that it's a little bit more fantastical. And in this book, as with all of the other books, there is kind of a central white male character who is perceiving the end of the world and seeing it as, all they kind of perceive is doom, and their own kind of their person with this doom as the backdrop. This is how we're introduced to the world. And often, specifically in the Crystal world, there's a secondary character called Suzanne Clare, who was an ex-lover of the protagonist. And she's kind of quite different from all of the other characters in the book, and especially from the protagonist, in the sense that she sees this mineralization, like this impending kind of death, as a site for rebirth, or a site for, wonder and of potential for a new type of being. And she's sort of dismissed by all of the other characters as a sort of a princess who's been enchanted by the forest, and she's a little bit put down, and we don't really see her all that often unless she's got something to do with one of the male characters. And so I kind of, as a prompt, I wanted to sort of create a story for her where she's the protagonist, or at least where her view of this situation is the protagonist. And that's partly because, honestly, also for me, myself, like it's really work that I need to do to find an optimistic place to even be in a mindset where I could think about what kind of solutions could be there for some of the environmental challenges that we're facing. And so this was sort of a thought exercise that I set up as a means to sort of create this world. It's sort of the prompt that sort of spawned this world in Hybrids and Strings.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah, it reminds me a little about this movie Melancholia. I don't know if you've seen it, where there's
I have.
also
It was a while ago, but yeah.
a bunch of characters who are reacting differently to a disastrous future. So, and I find interesting in that movie that we're looking into nuanced kind of behaviors. Of course, there is the schematic stuff, the stuff that is, yes, I'm afraid or I'm running away, but there's sort of more nuanced approaches in there, which I think is echoed a lot in your work. At least that's one of the quality of it, that is, things are not that clear cut between bad and good, and disastrous and or happy. So and we can feel that in the piece. I'd like perhaps to come back a little bit on deceleration also, but more because you were mentioning that just before we came on stage, on the process of production, the idea that this was meant to be a piece of slow production, right? And not something that we intended at the beginning, but it's kind of how things played out, right?
Well, yeah, also the pandemic definitely affected things. Yeah. at some point I became really interested in the idea of interested in the idea of acceleration as a sort of a concept of kind of speeding up everything so that as quickly as possible we can get to the next thing. And I wanted to, like, I feel like that doesn't quite work with me in the way that I want to do things, and especially when it comes to making my work. And increasingly over the last years, I feel more and more comfortable working on things that take a really long time, and kind of beginning with an initial idea and then growing it in lots of different directions, and sort of not approaching my work in a way where it's sort of like a production line and I need to make as many things as possible as quickly as possible, which is something that possibly also comes a little bit from spending a little bit of time in gaming, in sort of congresses and kind of festivals and so on, where there's a lot of gaming people who are coming from gaming, and there's this kind of this push to kind of market everything and to sort of just churn things out as quickly as possible. And I wanted to sort of create a mode of working where it's sort of the opposite of that.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
And so this is also a little bit how I came to the idea of kind of working on these paintings and bringing the paintings into the world from one direction, and also working with the photogrammetrical meshes in a different way, where I was also kind of creating these other video sequences and sort of creating this other layer of this world of Suzanne Clare, or of Hybrids and Strings universe. Which ties in really well. I'm really glad that I was able to work with Fabienne and Victoire on this, because this is something that absolutely fits into the kind of philosophy of the types of productions that you've been working on already. Like, for instance, with Melody, like kind of building something that can grow and that can take on different forms, and that has kind of all of these different things that you can explore and find within it. And I find this really interesting, and a really interesting way forward. Yeah.
That's an habit that's inherited. I worked in games for many years, for about 15 years, working on big virtual worlds, Grand Theft Auto, World of Warcraft, these kind of huge sprawling worlds, and from that experience, I really remember this idea of starting with the world first, because when we started working on GTA 4 or GTA 5, that was the first priority. Let's make the world real. Let's make the world interesting. And then the stories and the quests and the campaigns and everything comes after. Okay, so that's something that I guess we're doing also with hybrids, of course, at a much personal scale, but the idea is the same. And the other thing I realize now that you talk about it is that in the gaming industry, there is a lot of rush, and there's a lot of course, of crunch and all that stuff. But there's always, for the best kind of games, that idea that it will ship when it's ready, and will not ship when it's not, or before that, or just because it's Christmas and stuff like that. And when you are a developer, a studio that can muster enough power to do that, that's when you have a gem. That's when you have something that really shines, because time has been taken for trial and error, for polishing, for really making it right. So perhaps that kind of experience translated in how we approach things at Fabula, or at least I recognize myself. I wanted to do that, to give you the time and space necessary for you to also work with your particular process, because I'd like to go back maybe a little bit on your creative process, because you're a painter. You have a background in film. You made you graduated from Le Fresnoy in French, which is this very famous art school for film. And then you worked with 3D, stereoscopic 3D. And so now I think you're assembling and combining a lot of different things, including the painting, not just digital stuff. So do you mind maybe taking us through some of your process, like what comes first? Are you drawing first, or how does that work?
The thing is, I studied painting in my undergraduate, and I think that, like, for me as a painter, as purely as a painter. I was really interested in texture and surface, but also about perception. I got really interested in kind of trying to recreate a subjective point of view. And actually, that's what got me into experimental video, because trying to make the images that I needed to make using paint was just taking too long. So it made more sense to start sketching with video collages, and then that kind of led eventually into stereoscopic 3D. But even when I was working with stereo, it was kind of I was really interested in reproducing this certain type of texture and this certain type of surface quality that has some sort of, I don't know, it's somehow just very important to me, and to the way that the type of images that I like making, I suppose. And in the last few years, because the time I spent at the Frenois, I spent a lot of time working on computers and doing kind of purely digital work. And it was actually a little bit of a reaction against that. You know, I wanted to be moving around, and I wanted to, you know, be working with different materials and be kind of having more of having more of my senses activated when I was working, rather than just my eyes. And so it was almost like a conscious decision, like I'm going to start trying to do this with paint. Or I'm going to try and bring paint into my digital world.
Great stuff. Perhaps just to signal also that Off Hybrids and Strings is available for download here in the official selection of South by Southwest, but it's also premiering in Paris early April for a festival called Les Ailleurs, when it's going to be accessible to the public, and then you're intending to show in various places. I think your habit has been to show in museums, mostly contemporary art museums. But with this piece, I think it has potential to go to any kind of, and perhaps a wider set of venue. So I just wanted to ask maybe if there's any question from you. I don't know what time is it now, but it's probably a good time to take questions if there's any to Lauren.
Yeah, I had a question.
Yeah.
So in Of Hybrids and Strings, it's you get this dual feeling from a very like serene and like meditative feeling, and then also at the same time this like restrictive feeling at times with the strings, and how the restriction of the movement of the strings, and how some you can kind of control and some you can't. And I'm curious to hear you speak a little bit about that dichotomy of feeling, and what led you to kind of create that within that space.
Yeah, I suppose I like making kind of things that are a little bit complex, you know, where there's a little bit of danger or a little bit of irritation or a little bit of something that, you know, creates some sort of suspense or some sort of friction, I suppose. So yeah, when I was creating the experience, I didn't. I wanted to make something where you really feel like you're being affected by the environment. You know, it's not the other way around. It's not an interactive world where you're able to just manipulate everything that's around you. It's more, I wanted to make something where you're being a little bit manipulated by the environment, like in a good way, that you're being changed by this place that you find yourself in, rather than the other way around.
Well, it's wonderful, and you definitely succeeded in that. It was very great. Thank you.
Thanks very much.
Maybe talking back a little bit, something that we've not really talked about, but well, at least just an intention, but really the Off Hybrids and Strings is the first occurrence of perhaps a world that is bigger, that has more ways to materialize. So can you share or hint at some of the things that you're working on for the future?
I'm working on some augmented reality works, which I actually hope to develop them into a series of site-specific augmented reality works, where I'm working again with these kind of vegetation elements and kind of putting them together into a kind of a scene that begins to change at some point and is surprising. And so I'll be able to. I'm going to be premiering one of those later in the summer, and then the other iterations. I'm not really sure. They're all kind of happening at the same time. I think that I'll just make a new one wherever I'm traveling. And then also I'm working on another sort of I don't know, it's another part of this universe of Suzanne Clare that's a little bit more of about her imagination and about the kind of what she sees when she begins to sort of dream about this this mineralization world. It's called the Compost series, and it's also a little bit inspired by some words by one of my favorite writers, Ursula Le Guin. When she was talking about her creative process, she was saying that it works by her kind of experiencing everything in her every day, and then it kind of goes inside of her, and then it sort of all becomes like the same material. So it's almost like compost, and then it sort of comes back out as something different. You know, it was originally all of these experiences that she had, but it sort of becomes transformed somehow and then comes back out in the form of this writing. And there are also references in Donna Haraway's text about compost. I'm not sure whether they were inspired also by Le Guin or not, but yeah. That one also.
They're really connected.
They're very much, yeah. There are a lot of references to. But yeah.
But I find it really amazing that you work by touches like this. Is like rather than that's a big difference with what I've done in gaming in all these years, where usually you create the worlds, it looks a certain way, you have a certain set of characters, and you can do certain things, and then you will imagine things. It looks like you're working with paintbrushes, and so there is a thing that it looks like this, and then there's something very different that is just the imagination of a character, and then there's an AR piece that is more about the vegetation itself. And I really like, and I'm very supportive of this way of making a world that lets you have a lot of space in your imagination to connect all the dots together. It's not like we're giving you a world and then there's a certain set of things that you can do in it. It's to me, it's much closer to the real life. It's you know, things are nuanced and full of possibilities. So yeah, thank you, Lauren. I don't know if there's any additional questions.
Thanks very much.
And encourage everyone to thank you, Maud, to go and watch it. It's going to be up until the 20th. You can download on your PC and then watch on any Oculus headset. So Quest plus Link, Quest 2 plus Link, Oculus Rift. You can have an experience. It's a version. It's the first release version, but as we explain, that's a world we really want to build upon and expand, and we're looking at various ways, different technologies and stuff, but it's something that's going to accompany you for quite some time if you're keen and if you like this world. So thanks again for your attention and coming here virtually from wherever you are, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.